I would like to announce as our next speaker, Michael Upstone, and he will cover the subject of conscious co-creation tools. So over to Mike.
Thank you, Caspar. How's the microphone? Great. Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming today. Hope you had a good journey. To those from Sweden, good morgon. To those from Germany, guten Morgen. And to everyone else, good morning. That's the limit of my language skills, I think. So, yeah, I'm going to talk about conscious co-creation this morning. And the aim of the presentation is to highlight the key differences between highly effective and ineffective organisations, and to prove that long-term effectiveness is not all about money or resources. And along the way, I want to underline the inversions in approach, the complete reversals that define truly effective organisations. And in doing so, I'd like to lay down foundations that can be applied very simply with your own conscious co-creation model. So we'll be covering the failure of organisation and why organisation is failing, the solution, which is something known as systems thinking, developed by Dr. W. Edwards Deming. I'll give you some examples of very long-term successful organisations. And those examples will help us to lay down the key foundations for our own conscious co-creation model. And then I'll lead you into the next steps, which is that if you're interested and you want to get into more complex, more sophisticated organisations, then there is a model available called the Model of Sustainable Organisation, MOSO. And there are other resources that you can find on the internet. So we've got a couple of quotes. John Hagel said, and this is a few years ago, the average life expectancy of a company in the S&P 500 has dropped from 75 years in 1937 to 15 years. And this trend is down. It's down sharply. It's like organisations are falling off a cliff. So it's going to be less than 15 years now. And even worse in Europe, according to Ellen de Rouge. The average life expectancy of companies in Europe is 12.5 years. So these companies, these organisations are not even making it into their teenage years. So here's a classic epic fail. Okay, that was part of the United Nations, and what you've got is layers of complexity upon layers of complexity, hierarchy, division, structural complexity. Whoa. What a nightmare. We end up with inefficiency, ineffectiveness, frustrated people, organisations not actually meeting their goals. So the failure of organisation, the reasons for it are very common if we start to look at them, putting more money and profits before people. And there have been a number of studies recently that have shown that the organisations that put people before profits actually make more profits and last for longer. Damaging customers in the process, in their cost cutting, the elimination of customer service, more stress on selling things instead of selling the appropriate things to the customer, damages the customer. And, those people who listen into this from the UK will be familiar with the irony. The universe always teaches in irony and resonance, and the irony of trying to communicate with communications companies, companies like mobile providers and things like that. Your call is in a queue, but it's important to us. We'll get in touch with you soon. Focusing especially on short-term profit over the quality and the effectiveness of the organisation, supporting the people who are looking after the customers. A rear view mirror view of management. In other words, managing organisations based on the historical figures instead of looking ahead and making predictive models. Hierarchy and command and control. How familiar is this? These major organisations have pyramidal hierarchical structures that cause not just one pyramid, but pyramids within pyramids, people who are very concerned about their own power, their own control, and then you have departmental rivalries coming in and miscommunication and all sorts of other problems coming in. Changing and arbitrary targets. This month it's sales, next month it's customer service, next month it's something else. Resistance to feedback and change. I was a management consultant in my early days, and what was very common was seeing someone who brought not just the problem, but the solution. And they were cut off at the butt because their approach was viewed as being something that was attacking the organisation instead of something that was bearing a gift to improve something for the organisation itself, for the people and for the customers. And all of this leads to fear and lack of collaboration. But ultimately, I think it was summarised very well by Deming as failure to manage a system as a system. So we need to get past the semantics, first of all, the meaning of the words. What is a system? Because people very often have knee-jerk, powerful reactions to words like organisation, leadership, management, structure, etc. So what is a system? A system is simply something that operates in a different way from its collection of separate parts, and it has clear outputs that it produces. So let's take the human body. There's a system, and it's a system within the system because we live in the world, and we live in a world within the universe. And if we take out the liver, the body no longer works in the same way as we expected it to. And Deming compared this to like, okay, cut off your hands and put it on the table, and then study it. It doesn't work the same way. So Deming made a profound impact on this. He was a statistician who, first of all, got involved in war production. That led him into quality management. And after the Second World War, he was sent to speak to the top 200 leaders of manufacturing in Japan. And this was a very, very deep, profound, humanistic, humorous and wise man who was the son of a farmer. And I think that's evident in terms of his caring about people and caring about the environment. And Deming so spellbound the top 200 leaders of Japanese manufacturing after the Second World War that they completely adopted his model. And when you walk into the Toyota head office now, you'll see two pictures on the wall. One is Soichiro Toyoda, the founder of Toyota. And the bigger picture is the one of Dr. W. Edwards Deming. And Deming is credited by the Japanese for the success of their entire manufacturing industry, and it operates very differently from most European and American organisations. So one of the things that Deming said was that if you don't know the capabilities of a system, there is no point in setting targets. The system will deliver what the system will deliver. And he went on to say, if you do know the capabilities of a system, there is no point in setting targets. The system will deliver what the system will deliver. And what he was getting at was the profound truth that the occupation of management in particular should be about a focus on improving the system itself instead of just setting targets like hoops of flames and asking people to jump through them. So these organisation models and principles have had an absolutely huge impact on long-term performance of organisations. And if we cast our mind back, we look now to the success of Japanese manufacturing and where it was. And in the 50s and in the 60s and even the 70s, it was absolutely excoriated. It was gutted by prejudice and all sorts of things by British management especially, but American management also. And what we saw was the failure of their manufacturing and the taking over of companies like Toyota and Nissan, etc. So we've got these examples of exceptional long-term performance now, which can start to provide a guide for us as to what makes a really successful organisation. We've covered Toyota and Japanese manufacturing, but there's also the Mondragon cooperative in Spain. They started off in the 1950s, founded by a priest who wanted to help the local economy, and they were making paraffin lamps. And now they're a top 10 manufacturer in Spain who, among hundreds of trust concepts, they actually get involved in making things like solar panels using robotics. We've got the John Lewis Partnership in the UK, who've been going for well over 100 years. And in 1999, this is an organisation that is owned by its members, by the way, there was a motion put to the John Lewis Partnership. People who run John Lewis, which is a department store, and they run a very successful supermarket called Waitrose. And those people The people who sweep the floors, the people who stack the shelves, the people who operate the cash outs for the customers voted overwhelmingly against flotation on the stock market, despite the fact that they would have earned on average £100,000 each through that flotation. Why? They knew it was going to destroy their company, it was going to destroy the culture, it was going to destroy the management. And this is a caring company. You go in and it's very different to a lot of other supermarkets. We've got W.L. Gore in the United States who make Gore-Tex clothing, who use self-organising teams and are consistently in the top 10 employers in the United States, and they have been there for decades. Interestingly, we've got the Ford Motor Company, because Deming went in to see Ken Peterson, the chief executive of Ford in the 1970s, when Ford had been displaced from the number one, and they were hemorrhaging cash. They were producing thousands, if not tens of thousands or more of cars each year from the production line that were flawed, and they were coming in the back of the factory to be repaired again. And no one could stop it, because even the board directors were absolutely terrified of stopping the production line. Whereas if we went to Toyota, what we would find is it's not the within the remit of the floor cleaner to stop the production line, but they could say, hey, I've spotted a problem, and they could tell the supervisor, and it was within the supervisor's remit. It was their duty and their responsibility to stop the line and put it right. And then to communicate to other supervisors and to the management if there was a problem that needed to be addressed and they needed to spread through the system. So they had a very, very fast feedback loop on dealing with issues that arose. And in the case of Ford, they started to adopt the Deming principles, and some quite well-known interviews involving Ken Peterson and Dr. W. Edwards Deming. And it's quite clear from looking at those interviews that Ken Peterson just really didn't get it. But he started to apply it, and they got the results, and they improved Ford. And then Ford drifted away from the principles again. And this happened to a certain extent more recently with Toyota as well. And what happened was Ford then went back to apply those principles, and again the performance improved. And the same applies to Toyota. And this led to the birth of the whole industry of quality management. So one of the keys of a conscious creative organisation is to harness something called the collective consciousness. And there was an English statistician and philosopher who went to a country fair one day, and the country fair in those days before television was the equivalent of the Olympics. They would have tens upon tens of thousands of people together, gathered in these fields to look at the agricultural products and technologies and things like that. And he stood on this little hill and he thought, oh, this is the opportunity I've been looking for to do some experimentation with statistics. And he walked through this massive crowd, and then he saw a guess the weight of the ox competition. He thought, here's my opportunity. So he kept on walking, and then he saw a big bunch of farmers, and he thought, I think the farmers will have a good idea about the weight of the ox. And then he saw a big bunch of butchers, and he thought, I think the butchers will also have a good idea of the weight of the ox. But what he did was he went away and he averaged up everyone's guesses about the weight of the ox. And his guess came within 1 kilo, 2 pounds, of the weight of the ox. And even more interestingly, all of the other guesses from all of the other very, very capable and educated people, including the farmers and the butchers, were over 5 kilos or 10 pounds away. So he had something of statistical relevance. But it's very important to notice that actually when we apply the collective consciousness, it is not about averaging. It's about using statistics in a particular way to average out errors and mediocrity. So it's not about averaging. That was just where it started as a concept. So the key features of harnessing the collective consciousness are that it's diverse. The bigger the group, the better. And that's going to include all of the scientists, all of the experts, the mechanics, the specialists, etc. But their knowledge is kept within context. It's independent, and that means there's no clustering. It's not like a political party system. It's decentralized, so the independent expert and local knowledge is held in context, and it's also structured. So it is both decentralized and structured at the same time. And what has been found time after time by statisticians is that a large group of people consistently make better decisions than a small group or an individual. This is very powerful. The more we can start to leverage the collective consciousness of groups, the less we get involved with the limitations, ego and weaknesses of an individual particular leader. So how do we actually apply this? The example that I give is this. Our ancestors have been sailing seas and oceans successfully for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. Trading. How did they do it? Intention. Quantum physics, intention. Spirituality, intention. The intention is, where did they want to go? So they agreed that they wanted to go somewhere together. The next thing is that they had a flowing process to take in feedback to account for the action of the wind and the waves along the way, because they would probably never be on a perfect course from the time they left one port until they arrived at another one. And this is despite having incredibly simple, primitive equipment and a very changeable, potentially extremely hostile environment. And the third element now comes in, which is having an appropriate structure to get them there. So none of these things work on their own. The intention, the process, and the structure are like a three-legged stool. They have to go together at the foundation of any organisation for it to be successful. Now let's apply those very same principles to how most governments and major organisations work nowadays. The intention itself is changed. In fact, it becomes a series of short-term exhortations or targets. This month it's jobs, next month it's sales, next month it's tax or trade or whatever it is. In a corporate organisation it's customer service, and then it's costs, and it keeps on changing around. The process itself is rigid. It's resistant to feedback. It doesn't want to hear about the opportunities to improve, either from the people within the organisation or from the customers. It wants to believe it's absolutely the best at what it does, that we're super well-trained people, we're a giant in our market, and we're doing very, very well. Thank you very much. The cliff is just around the corner. And the structure itself is the pyramid. It in itself is hierarchical. Unlike Toyota, which has 4 levels of management worldwide, your typical structure, like the British Civil Service, has 448,000 employees and 12 or 14 levels of management. Toyota has 300,000 employees, but it does it with a fraction of the management power. So the structure itself, the pyramid forms pyramids within pyramids. People are very obsessed with power. They gravitate towards the top. They want to have their own pyramid and they want to control everything beneath it. And you end up with politics and division and infighting coming in. And that's the result. Most organisations, if we applied those very same tools back to the ship analogy, the ship would be hitting the harbour wall before it even left port. So the key elements of a systems thinking organisation are intention, process, structure, and they're just the 3 stepping off points to the next stages, which are the vision. The vision is, in an ideal world, what are all the most important things that show us our success, and what do they look like when we actually get there? Because the clearer we can actually visualise what's important to us and what our success looks like in an ideal world, the closer we're going to get to it and the quicker we're going to get to it. And those vision points, or key performance indicators as they're known in the commercial world, then mean that we're now in a position to actually produce a strategy to achieve them, and that can be translated into a step-by-step plan to implementing it. And then we need to make sure that we embed consciousness within the organisation itself. So there is a constantly flowing feedback loop of self-improvement, of analysis, of reflection going on. And when we look at the words of Lao Tzu, 2,000 or so years ago, he said, "Be still as a mountain, flow like a great river." And I know that the first time I read that, that was a puzzle to me. This was typical Chinese philosophy. It went whoop, right over my head. And now when I reflect on these things, what I see is the inversion. The intention needs to be still. It needs to be constant. The process itself needs to be flowing. And all of these things are reversed in most major organisations. So let's just have a quick example of an intention: to create an empowered community where individual creativity and sovereignty is valued and applied. We can work smartly and intelligently by connecting to proven, safe technologies for our key community needs. We can create abundance by covering more than we need, flipping costs into income, producing surpluses. And we can cover the basic essentials of food, water, waste, buildings, energy, health, and we can do this in an exemplary way. So, Schwartz in 2009 said structure is everything. We need an appropriate structure for what we're actually aiming to achieve. And if we start to confuse them, we're going to end up with all sorts of bizarre outcomes and manifestations. So in terms of organisation, I think we're looking at two key elements of structure. The first one is legal structures, and they are used to create a structured separation and protection. And the second element is human structures, which are used to create mutuality, co-ownership, involvement, and to leverage the collective consciousness. So when we look at legal structures, we've got a number of specialist functions that come into play. Trusts are typically used by the rich and famous for asset protection. Very important. They're using a specific vehicle for a specific purpose. Then we have property ownership, which can be used through a structural mechanism of copyright. Now we can also add on local limited liabilities companies for local trading. Or we can use cooperatives to create co-ownership. They all have different strengths, different weaknesses, different features. We need to be conscious about what we need and how we apply it. We also have foundations coming in more recently, non-profit organisations. And they tend to be starting to replace the role of charities. And charities, there are many problems with charities. Just get on the internet and Google what happens to the chief executive salaries of a lot of major charities, and what actually happens to the money that comes into that organisation. In some cases, we're looking at very big, very powerful organisations where 3%, 4% actually ends up going to the people who the donations have been requested for. So these are beset by regulation, they're often corrupted, and they become self-interested cash cows. The human structure features, we want to create something which has mutuality. If we don't create that, then we've got more division and more separation coming in. And that means co-ownership. We all need to own the organisation. And that is the key to unlocking involvement and also to creating stability within the organisation. And in order to do that, we need to create collective consciousness. So how do we do this? Well, the answer is at the bottom: circles. So here is, for an example, a community. It could be the whole world, it could be our little local village or eco or conscious community or whatever. And this is the circle, this is all of the people. And what we would have in the middle is a group of people who are drawn to the tasks of strategy, planning, organisation, coordination, etc. Not everyone is going to be drawn to this task. And what happens is that in a typical organisation where the pyramid is operating, they end up running the show and everyone else ends up underneath. But if we look at nature, what actually happens is we need to address another inversion in here, another reversal. And that is that in a co-creative organisation, these people in the middle are performing an act of service. They're invoking, they're offering gifts. And those gifts now need to go to the whole community. And it's the whole community now have an opportunity to ask questions, to clarify, to put in their own input, but ultimately to make the decision. So we have an inversion going on. And if we apply that, then we end up starting to recreate how nature works, because the basic flow of energy in nature at an atomic level is a toroid. So the flow of information, the invocation, the plans, the strategies, etc., go out from the middle to the outside, and they're the ones who say yes, no, or modify it, and they come back into the middle again. So we're creating a toroidal flow and not a pyramid. And if we do that and we start to now add on specialist groups around the outside, dealing with other subjects, the vision items for the community, the elements like food, water, waste, energy, healthcare, building materials, social facilities and education. Because again, not everybody is going to be drawn to that. What we're creating is the flower of life. So now we need to look at the processes that drive this kind of organisation. So the processes include the energy circle. And this is differentiated from the listening circle, which is the typical sort of tribal circle that many of you will have heard of. And the intention here is that the small group of people in the middle are governed by the flow of energy. So this is a chaired operation. And what happens is those with the experience, with the ideas, the creative inspiration, and the solutions focus are able to put them forward. So the flow goes very, very quickly with those people and they start to build on the positive solutions. So part of the role of the chair and part of the team agreements that this is based on is that the people are focused on always putting forward a positive solution. And if they don't like it, then the onus is on them to put forward an improvement to that solution or an alternative solution. Because I don't like it doesn't fly. Not in this environment. I don't like it is a negative blocking feature. And if we look at a consensus-created organisation, and this is the subtle difference between this and a consensus organisation, consensus works, but it works in the context of long-established communities, long-established religious organisations, etc. And people are therefore very respectful of each other, very knowledgeable of each other, and it takes something quite different and special to stand out and say no, because that one person can block the whole process. So this is a removal of a blocking element coming in to our processes, which is that we agree to follow the team solution. Now, one of the other roles of the chair then is to bridge the solutions. So let's say we have our community and we're talking about creating our first building. Well, we might have someone who's absolutely passionate about building domes. And we might have someone else who's absolutely passionate about building a timber frame and straw bale building and coating it with geopolymer. Well, if we have enough resources within the community, we can try both. So why not try both? It's not a question about forcing people into one area or another, but it is, okay, well, we're going to build the dome first. Okay. We all then work on building the dome. Or those who are drawn to the task or are supported in building the dome. So the role of the chair is to keep the focus and the energy of the group on the positive intention of the group and to support the team processes themselves. And the energy circle allows that flow to move very dynamically within a group. So what happens if we're stuck? If we're stuck, then we can revert to the deeper, slower listening circle. And this is a formal arrangement now. Now it goes down in order. You don't have to speak, but if you're next, then you have the opportunity to speak. And you can speak for as long as you like. The aim is to unearth deeper issues, psychological connections, semantic issues to do with words. When you say system, I always think of the system. Okay, we're building understanding between each other now. And the listening circle goes round at least 3 times. And if that becomes stuck, then it has an opportunity to adjourn and to think about it overnight and to readdress it the next day. But ultimately that can be used, both can be used as a decision-making entity. And we can also employ the Toltec principles here, which are be impeccable with your word. Do as you say as you do. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions. Always do your best. And by all means, be skeptical, but learn to listen. Because what happens when ego manifests in a group situation is that people want to crush what other people have to say. So other elements of our team agreements can include things like take responsibility. Take responsibility for your actions, for your emotions, and dealing with the team issues. Because the process only works if the team and the team intention are supported. We do use team decisions, and that means the chair very often has no say, no vote, but they're there to help to manage the energy and the flow and the effectiveness of the group and to make sure that everyone gets heard along the way. And as discussed, we can try more than one option if there are competing solutions. And we also need some processes for dealing with conflict, which is the listening circle, and that can be supported by very highly experienced, trained people who are good at dealing with people. Because we've got various different kinds of skills coming into this team environment, and not everyone has absolutely blindingly good skills with people. And that's where the Universal Trust uses someone who has training and deep decades of experience in working with people and Imago training in that area, Biere. So back to Schwartz, structure is everything. And this is what we're now starting to look at potentially for our community structure. We can have as many circles as we want outside the middle, but now we see that we have our core strategy team, and it starts to overlap with the groups dealing with the water, the energy, the waste, the healthcare, the building materials, the food, the social facilities, the educational facilities, etc. And we can even have another flower coming around the outside, which is, for example, people dealing with outdoor food and other people dealing with indoor food. And what we're creating is the flower of life, a natural, energetic, flowing, balanced, flat structure. And around the outside, we can also have sub-teams dealing with specific issues. Self-organising teams in exactly the way that W.L. Gore works. Again, all we need is to have some simple processes, structures, and team agreements governing them. And in W.L. Gore, what happens is that the team elects its leader. And if the leader's not doing a good job, then they can change. But in the meantime, it's the team that's making the decisions. Very important. And what does that mean? You've got a very, very balanced organisation. You've got a very creative and an innovative organisation. And you've got an organisation where the leader, if they have a family crisis, or if they have an accident or something, or they're sick, is replaced by someone else in the group, and the whole thing flows seamlessly. It's not stuck in this hierarchical structure. So now let's look at the values that we can apply to this organisation. Trust. What does trust mean? People can count on us. We do as we say as we do. We're not perfect, but when we know something's going wrong and we can't abide by a commitment, for example, then the first thing to do is to go and communicate that with that other person and say, look, I'm really sorry, I don't want to give you a problem, but what happens most of the time in organisations run by fear is that the ostrich technique takes over and people stick their head in the sand until it's too late and they have to say something, and then the other person has got a problem. Openness to learning. We don't know it all. None of us knows it all. We've got something to learn from absolutely everyone and something to learn from absolutely every situation. A key distinction for us, if we're using the Deming principles, is to differentiate between general situations or general rules and special situations. Very important to understand that subtlety of nuance. Transparency, honesty, straightforwardness. Sharing the success within the organisation equally. It doesn't matter if you're the one who makes the cup of tea or the heart surgeon. The heart surgeon really needs a cup of tea after they've been in the operating theatre for 8 hours. There's probably nothing better for the heart surgeon than a cup of tea after 8 hours. Do they really want to make their own cup of tea after 8 hours? No. But that's what they need at that particular time. Respect. Respect for the environment in which we live and work. Respect for each other as well. And another bit of Deming coming in here, which is examples without theory invite mindless copying. Mindless copying. And that's exactly what happens in most organisations. They see what happens on television, in the documentaries and things like that, and they just go and do the same stuff. So the aim of this is to act consciously and systematically with intent. So let's look at the vision now. The overall vision can be something like to create the quality, effectiveness and efficiency in our community. When we look at the specific areas that water is purified and energized, coming into our homes and re-entering the environment when it goes back out. That the food itself is consistent, of the highest nutritional value and absolutely fresh. And no matter where you shop organically, most places are not going to have fresh food. It could be that 90% of our food is homegrown. We could even get into growing tropical fruit and vegetables in a closed-loop growing system. So these are the kind of things that we can scope into our vision. We're abundant in clean energy. Our waste is recycled, so we have a closed resource loop. Dr. Charles Blake is going to be talking about that later on. And resource sovereignty, which means that we can reclaim all of those materials to yield clean energy, clean water, and pure nanomaterials that can go straight back into a 3D printer. We're self-sufficient in the most advanced healthcare, bioresonance diagnostics, frequency healing, frequency treatments, essential oils, colloidal silver and gold, and we can cover everything in health terms apart from trauma, because we've got to stick our hands in the air and say that no matter what technologies we've got at the moment, nothing is going to beat modern trauma medicine if we've had a car crash or another kind of accident. So we can use natural building materials along with natural geopolymers, wood and straw, for example. We can build a building using geopolymers capable of lasting more than 1,000 years. And in fact, one of the people who I'm in touch with, George Swanson, advises the Chinese government on the rebuilding or the restoration of their old temples in China. And those buildings are 2,500 to 3,500 years ago, built of wood and straw and coated with a natural rock geopolymer. This material, magnesium oxide, can be used for capturing carbon. It can also make a breathable environment. It's highly insulated and comfortable, especially when we employ it with straw bale, and it bonds perfectly with cellulosic material, like wood and straw. It can be forest fireproof, surviving thousands of degrees of heat. Earthquake-proof, because it's incredibly strong and incredibly light. It can be up to 7 times stronger than steel and 20 times stronger than concrete. It can be EMF-proof, even radiation-proof, as was proven near Chernobyl, because when Chernobyl went up all those decades ago, I think in 1986, some people were living nearby in buildings coated with magnesium oxide. And the interesting thing was that they were barely registering on the Geiger counters, whereas a lot of other people were absolutely off the scale. They were protected by the building, by the natural material. So this material is extremely strong and flexible, and it's crystalline. It forms a single, uniform, crystalline structure. So unlike concrete, when we pour a multi-story, this is going to bond perfectly. It forms a crystal building. And that means it can conduct positive, resonating energy into the building itself. There are 2 properties we're looking at here. One is diamagnetics and one is paramagnetics. This creates a building that, unlike concrete, when we know about concrete sickness, because a lot of the major companies in Germany have actually replaced the floors in their buildings from the concrete, because the concrete sucks the electrons out of batteries and of people. So there's a reason for all of this. And what's our measure of success? Let's get to the bottom line. Our measure of success is to change the model on a long-term basis and for others to follow our example. Let's inspire them. But first of all, we've got to inspire ourselves. So our community strategy can now come off the back of this, which is to create a stable, innovative entity, first of all, the organizational structure, to support individual sovereignty and personal development. This is not all about creating a community where the view of bonding is that everyone has to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and chant and sing together. As an introvert, that's not going to fly with me. We can cover the key strategic areas to move through self-sustainability into abundance for all. So we're consciously looking to make surpluses here. And if we do that, we can flip around those costs for your typical community to create multiple income streams. So all of it becomes potentially a source of income, or gifting, or donation, whatever. But it gives us that opportunity. And we should consciously use the best technologies to support this within a coherent framework. And we can target building materials, food, water, waste, health, energy, education, social needs. And our aim is to overproduce and make conscious surpluses. And we can leverage that. We can leverage the surpluses by adding a shop to sell the food, for example, or the colloidal silver or whatever else we're making. Could be the technologies. And an eco-cafe restaurant. Courses. People want to know how to organise themselves, how to build straw bale buildings, how to create the frame, for example. That opens the doors to seminars and education as well. And that's creating that's fulfilling a social need because other people are looking for the solutions as well. We can spread it around, but there's a universal principle, which is, we can donate, but there's also a return on energy. And it's only fair to then look for at least a donation coming back, if not a payment. It's up to you how you want to do it. And we can add on workshops, demonstration areas, healing areas. We can heal ourselves, we can heal people from outside the community as well. So this is somewhere that consciously isn't looking inward, it's looking outward. It's aiming to connect more widely with other people. It's somewhere that educates, excites, and inspires. Now, if we want to bring our collective consciousness into the organisation, what we need to do is to have a little cycle, a little wheel, if you like, a process which is going to constantly run, which is we plan something, whether it's creating our first straw bale building or how we're going to grow our food. Then we've got to do it. Then we've got to study what we've done. And we've got to take in feedback and say, you know what, that could have gone better. I'm not being critical, but that could have gone better. We get those ideas and those suggestions on the table, and then we act on them so that if we repeat the exercise, we're incorporating this, and we do it regularly. So whether it's the structure of the structure, the organisation of the organisation, the process of the process, how the building's going, all of this is constantly cycled so that we're building the collective consciousness, the collective expertise and experience into the organisation, and we've got a flow going on. So what we're doing is we are structuring regular internal and external feedback. We're asking the people in the organisation, we're also asking the customers, we're also asking the suppliers, we're asking our friends, the other people that we're interfacing with. We're bringing the information to the table, and then we're able to analyse it and to make some conscious decisions about it. And what we're creating is an environment which recognises mistakes, which we don't want to do in a big organisation. It's not allowed. As opportunities, golden opportunities for improvement. And that's continual improvement. And using the collective consciousness, we can cover tangible and measurable items. So the tangible and measurable items are things like costs, income, cash flow, profits, production, etc. If we're not aiming to introduce more separation, we've got to look into that world as well. But also, we're at the same time bringing in the intangible, the human elements, the people feedback from the people inside the organisation, the visitors and the suppliers, etc. And we need to create a regular schedule for this so that we can create our constant innovation and improvement. If we want to go further, this is just a stepping off point, and if we want to create, for example, a commercial type of organisation or a bigger organisation, then it's very good to take in other information. And this is the model of sustainable organisation. And what we see here is that plan, do, study, act creates a little wheel in the middle of the whole system, which is constantly cycling and taking in the voice of the system, the voice of the customer, and the voice of the people. And that information is used to design and redesign the whole system, if necessary, on a regular basis. And that influences the daily work processes that connect the customer needs, the partners and suppliers, and leads to satisfied customers or satisfied members of the community. And that all happens within the context of your operations, if you like. So we've got continual improvement and innovation built into our operations. And that also takes into account a wider model of the people, the culture, the leadership and the management. And then we've got an even wider sphere of influence coming in, which is the influences of society and learning. And all of that then is bounded by the environment. MOSO has a lot more information. It's not applicable to most communities, for example, but it is definitely worth exploring if you're interested in this area. And there are your free resources. There's a Moso Digest, which is a brief version of Moso. There's a Moso book and all of the separate articles. There's about 20 odd, and that's available from the website. That's going under some changes at the moment, but if it changes, we will post some notes on that. And if you want to start Googling, Google Deming, Dr. W. Edwards Deming, and systems thinking. So what are our motives for paradigm change? Deming said this: the big problems are where people don't realise they have one in the first place. How true is that? The whole objective of the collective consciousness is that I cannot see my blind spot. I think I can see all of you perfectly at the moment. You think you can see me and the screen, etc. We've still got a blind spot. But by having other people involved, we can cover that. The problem is the brain tends to skip over the blind spot and it invents the elements that aren't actually there. And Deming also said, learning is not compulsory, neither is survival. How true is that? So as a review, what have we covered? Organisational failure is endemic. It's the norm. Bad practice is the norm. Short-term organisation is the norm. Running to make as much profit as possible before you collapse the company, run away with the money, steal the pension fund, and leave the workers out on the street and the suppliers unpaid is the norm, and the customers unsatisfied. It's failing because of common inversions, reversals, failed thinking and mindless copying, and closed-mindedness to the solutions, frankly. Systems thinking is the solution, and it's well proven. It's been going for decades, and it's solid. The examples and the exceptions prove the rule. The companies that apply it and move away from it start to suffer. They go back to it again, or they close. And the key foundations are there to address the inversions, especially the intention, the structure, and the process are stepping off points. And we've covered the model and the strategy, which is to empower others and also collaborate among ourselves. And there are more resources readily available. And finally, a quote. Buckminster Fuller, another systems thinking favourite of mine. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Thank you. How are we for time and for questions now? Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, can you go back to the slide where you can get more information about this whole process? I mean, it was a lot of information, right?
Yeah.
About the model. So if I would like to go deeper.
Okay. Yeah.
One floor? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the Moso website. It's at the CQI, which is the Chartered Quality Institute in London. Unfortunately, their website's being revised at the moment, so I as of yesterday, don't know if that URL is still applicable, but if not, we will post a correction and have the presentation available for you to download. Also have a look at YouTube. YouTube does have the Moso stuff. It has an introductory video and various other things available. And the Moso products themselves are the digest, the book, and the articles. And the things to Google are Deming and systems thinking.
What was the name of this doctor?
Dr. W. Edwards, Edwards, Deming, Deming. It's quite an unusual name, so if you just Google Deming, you'll probably find him very quickly. Yeah. Any more questions? Now, it's the best time. Yeah. Set the intention, share the intentions with other people, adopt the structure or create your own structure. Again, discuss it, agree it, and then go into the processes. I can provide more information on the details of the processes for you. And the main thing is, treat them as tools. Be conscious. Look at this. It's the simplest tool in the world, isn't it? Yeah, works brilliantly at what it does. It's got nothing extra, nothing less. Doesn't work so well if I tip it upside down though, does it? doesn't work too well at hammering in nails or screwing in screws. It's got limitations. So we need to be conscious about the features and the benefits and the limitations of the tools that we use. And if it's not up to the job, we need to change them. Any more questions?